Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Google Hangouts. I am Crystal Cargis, and I am here live with our special guest, Brian Cuban. We're so happy to have you, Brian. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on again. I love these chats.
Well, we love having you. And for any of our viewers who don't know, Brian is a best-selling author. Your book, Shattered Image, chronicles your life and your recovery journey through body dysmorphic disorder, but you've also recovered from addiction and an eating disorder, and you just have such an amazing story of hope for so many people. And so we're just so grateful that you could be here with us to share that story today.
Well, thank you, and that is correct. In addition to eating disorders, I also battled cocaine addiction and alcohol addiction.
And it's just amazing to see how far you've come and how you've recovered from all these different things. And that's really what our main topic is today, is we want to just share with our viewers, how do you rebuild a life after addiction? I mean, there's so many ways that it can affect a person and really just destroys your life in multiple aspects.
Absolutely. It destroyed my family relationships. It destroyed my health, alcohol and cocaine.
Right.
It got to the point where I was just living my life to buy those two things. And a story I just recently told is it got so bad, and people may not relate to this, but in my world it's kind of funny. I was actually trading Dallas Mavericks championship tickets when they went to the finals for the first time to my drug dealer for cocaine. And
I was gonna, yeah,
I actually respectful to my family, and, you know.
Right. And I actually just watched that video from your keynote speech, and it was such a powerful, almost just testimony to show how bad you can get. And you know, even though you may not want to be doing those things, that's the power of addiction. And you called it the insanity of an addiction.
That's right. And insanity, we have to be careful with that because it can be stigmatizing. More like
Right.
the chaos of addiction. But in the addiction world, people understand what that means. But outside the world, people may view that as stigmatizing. So I wish I had really chosen the chaos of addiction. And to show you how chaotic it got, I would trade these tickets to my drug dealer for cocaine. Then I would take the cocaine. I would get paranoid and feel guilty about what I had done and flush it all down the toilet. Thousands of dollars in drugs. So that shows the quote and unquote insanity or chaos that addicts can live in.
Exactly.
Flush it down the toilet.
Right. I know. It's amazing that you found yourself at that point. And I guess if we backtrack just a little bit, if you can maybe just share with us a little bit about your journey and how did you get to that point in your addiction where you felt yourself in this really chaotic environment?
Sure. Well, there were other things going on as well. As you mentioned, I also had an untreated eating disorder. I had been bulimic since I was 18, untreated clinical depression, abusing alcohol, abusing steroids, and abusing cocaine, which I started abusing in 1987 after I moved to Dallas, Texas. All of this was untreated. I really didn't understand what treatment was at that point. And so I eventually got so despondent that there would be no hope for anything other but this vicious cycle of eating disorders, drugs. I was losing the respect of my family. I lost the respect of my family in my mind. I was losing the personal connections of true friendships. I was losing the personal connections of true family, where you're not all of a sudden going to the family get-togethers. Family is distancing. I tried to commit suicide. I went to a psychiatric facility twice. That's how low it took me. And finally, after a 2-day cocaine and sleeping pill and alcohol-fueled blackout, and my second trip to a psychiatric facility here in Dallas, Texas, I took my first step into recovery, and that began with a trip to 12-step.
That's so powerful, Brian. And that was just, you kind of just covered my next question that I wanted to ask you was, at what point in your, in your battle with all these different addictions, did you finally kind of wake up and just feel like, okay, I'm ready to take whatever step is needed for me to get help and to get better?
I can tell you exactly when that was. That was April 7th, 2007, standing in the parking lot of Green Oak Psychiatric Facility for my second time.
Mm.
after my girlfriend had walked in on me after she had gone away for a weekend and found me lying on my bed with cocaine and alcohol everywhere. She had no idea. So
Mm.
she took me down there, and she's crying, and I'm thinking she's gone. She actually stood with me, and we're getting married almost 10
Oh,
years later.
wow. Oh my goodness. Congratulations.
She stuck with me. So I'm
Oh,
standing in that parking lot, and I'm thinking, you know what? I'm not going to have a third trip back here. And what scared me even worse than that, Crystal, was that I realized that I had really reached the point where I was going to lose my family.
mm,
Because as any family that struggles with addiction is going to struggle with the gray area between love, enablement, and recovery.
sure.
Families may love you unconditionally, and we hope they do, but there are going to be limits to them watching someone destroy their life with addiction. If you're not going to try to take charge and at least take that first step into recovery, one step forward.
Right.
How I phrase a lot of my talk, just one step forward. They're not
Mm,
expecting you to recover all at once, but they have to see you want it. If they
exactly.
don't see you want it, they're going to step one step backwards because they have kids, they have families, they may still love. I mean, they still love you, but they can't save you. And every
Right.
family is going to come to that realization at some point. It just, for some, it's a short time. For some, it's a long time.
Exactly. And you mentioned your family, and you just wrote this beautiful column about how your father had touched your life and really just helped
Yeah.
you. And I remember seeing that around Father's Day. And sometimes I feel like it takes the people that we love the most to really just kind of break through when there's such strong addiction holds in anyone's life. And can you maybe share a little bit about just how the role that your father played in your recovery? And you speak of your brothers too.
Absolutely. And I also have to mention it wasn't just family. I had a very close friend who wasn't part of the drug circles,
Mm-hmm.
stepped in and helped me as well. So, my father, who, I love dearly, and he raised Mark, Jeff, and I growing up, family, family, family. He would say to us all the time, wives may come and go, girlfriends may come and go, and you hope they don't. He's kidding around. But he goes, when push comes to shove, all you have is each other. No matter where you go in life, no matter what happens to you, you always pick up that phone and you ask how the other one is doing, and you tell him that you love him. My father was the middle of three children, like I was. I thought of my father standing in that parking lot after that blackout, and I realized that I was about to lose what he instilled in us, the
Mm-hmm.
bond of brothers, the bond of family, because I was unwilling to step forward into recovery. I had had many moments like addicts do prior to that where you wake up after an all-night binger saying this is the last time. But
Right.
the further you get away from the binger, I had no problem, right?
Exactly.
Like any other addict, I had had hundreds, maybe thousands of those moments in addiction. But I knew in that parking lot that this was it. What my father said to us as children just resonated and just overpowered my thought process, and I couldn't lose that. And I couldn't disappoint my father. So that was a major step in my recovery,
Sure.
not wanting to disappoint my father, not wanting to disappoint my brothers who I'm very close to. And if you
Mm-hmm.
want to know how that stuck, all these decades later, Mark, Jeff, my father, and I, in Dallas, Texas, 1,000+ miles from Pittsburgh, PA, where we grew up, we all live within a mile of each other.
Oh, that is so special. What an amazing story just to see how they really supported you and were such a big part of, you taking that step to getting the treatment that you needed.
They did, and it took a while. My family, like any other family, struggled with what we talked about:
Sure,
what's enablement, what's recovery, and what's support. We
exactly.
struggled with that like anyone else. There was enablement. They enabled me. I remember after my first trip to Green Oak Psychiatric Facility, they took me back home because I wouldn't, they couldn't hold me. And I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, yeah, just take me back home, stay home for 2 weeks, and you'll be cured. And I'm like, okay, fine. My drug dealer delivers. That's a good. So that was the struggles we dealt with as a family,
Sure.
because family has to educate themselves. Family has to educate themselves and understand recovery as well.
Right,
And my
exactly.
family had to go through that educated process like anyone else.
That definitely makes sense. And so once you were in treatment, what different aspects of treatment were helpful to you? And of course, addiction recovery is a process and it goes through different phases. And so
Absolutely.
can you kind of walk us
Here's how I break it down. Here's how I
Yeah.
break it down. You have to deal with where you are, and you have to deal with how you got there.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone understands dealing with where you are. You're an addict. You're an alcoholic. You have an eating disorder. You have to go to rehab. You have to detox. You go in a 12-step and pick up your desire chip.
Mm-hmm.
That helps you get sobriety under your belt. That helps you understand the support process.
Mm-hmm.
The hardest part for me was not that.
Mm-hmm.
It was going back to my childhood and tearing back all the layers of my childhood and dealing with how I got there. Especially as a male with an eating disorder as well, who had a difficult relationship with his mom, not wanting to go back all those decades and face that and repair that, which I did repair. My mom and I are very good friends now because I came to understand that my addiction wasn't her fault. My eating disorder wasn't her fault. Parents certainly can play a role from an environmental standpoint, but parents don't cause addiction. Parents don't cause eating disorders. We know they're biologically based, environmentally driven.
Right, exactly.
So I had to go back and deal with that. And a lot of people don't want to do that. It's easier just to deal with the behavior. Deal with the behavior. Deal with the behavior. Okay, I'm sober for 90 days. I'm sober for 120 days. But if you don't deal with how you got there, you're just waiting for the next trigger to relapse.
Sure.
So that was hard. And once I started dealing with how I got there, realizing that it wasn't about blame, it was about recovery, I was able to forgive my mom. I was able to understand our difficult relationship. I was able to let go of the anger. I was able to forgive the bullies who physically assaulted me and teased me over my weight all those years ago. Letting go of anger was a major part of my recovery as well. Forgiveness.
Yeah, that's such a powerful point.
And I understand, Crystal, that means so many different things to different people. I'm only talking about what forgiveness meant to me.
Exactly.
People have gone through horrible, horrible situations, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and they may not view forgiveness the way I do.
Exactly. And
So
I
I
appreciate
do not delegitimize anyone's view of forgiveness or situation. I speak only for me.
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you bring up such a good point, that addiction goes through phases, and that initial detoxing phase where you're kind of in the structure of a treatment program can be actually a little bit easier than some of the difficult things you have to face in the long haul, like you talked about. I think another aspect of recovery that is difficult is kind of putting back the pieces of your life together. And that's something that can take years, like rebuilding relationships.
It's interesting. There's actually a TED Talk that just came out by a guy, Harry. I don't agree with everything he said in the TED Talk. It's about the causes of addiction are not what you think they are, and it's gone viral and it's circling around. But one point he does make that is very important is connections. Connections, connection to family, connection to friends who care, creating the new environment. That's a process. That is a process that can take years.
Exactly.
Restoring trust. During that 2-day blackout, I was unfaithful to my girlfriend. I had to own up to that. I had to restore that trust. Trust was the first thing I lost. So I had to restore trust of intimacy, trust of relationship, trust of family. It was a long process.
Sure. And I think that's something that some people might find disheartening, like even though they may be sober and abstinent from whatever drug or substance that they might have been abusing, I think that there's still that fear of, well, what's going to happen with the rest of my life? People might have been dealing with a job loss or, any type of financial loss, broken relationships. So what would your encouragement be to those addicts who are in recovery?
Well, first of all, I did get a question here. The most difficult part of coming forward for me was not so much fearing the judgment of others, It was the facing the fact that these things to me really happened, putting it
Right.
in words, putting it in, hearing myself say them, because that hurt. It forced me to deal with my emotions. Coming forward is recovery as well. It's not just writing a book. It's not just being an advocate. It's recovery. And it
Sure.
coming forward forced me to face my emotions in a way that I had never done before, and that was different than facing it in therapy.
Exactly.
My advice to those who have not yet come forward and are dealing with addiction, whether it's drugs, alcohol, heroin is a terrible plague right now, is that one, there's no shame in relapse.
Mm.
As long as we're above ground, there
Mhm.
is hope for recovery. And I was almost below ground, so I can attest to that.
Mhm.
Two, you are loved. You may feel unloved and alone, but you are loved. There are people that will help you if you step forward. There are resources, and you don't have to take a big step. It does
Mm.
not have to be a big step. People early in recovery, people who are thinking about recovery, they envision the blue sky. If this doesn't go away all at once, that's not recovery. I'm going to relapse. No,
Mm.
no, it's just little steps forward. Stop, and you're allowed to stop at each step and take a breath and assess where you are.
Mhm.
You're allowed to take a step backwards and assess where you've been. That's okay.
Sure.
Just take it. Because I can tell you from having been to the bottom that it is
Yeah.
possible to recover at any age.
Thank you so much, Brian. That is so encouraging. And I think that it's so important for people to hear that message of hope. I think there's a lot of um, just false impressions about what recovery looks like. And I know for myself, I'm in recovery from an eating disorder, and it's that same thing that there's no perfection. There's no kind of standards to recovery. It's all about taking the next step forward, and there's no shame
Absolutely.
in relapse.
I'm in recovery for that too, so I
Yeah.
understand that perspective too. But people just want big steps. People want it.
Sure.
People want the blue sky. Take,
Right.
take the little step. Take the little step.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important message that you're sharing too, that the process of rebuilding your life after addiction is going to take a while, and it is a process, but just because it's slow doesn't mean that the progress isn't there. I mean, would you definitely say that
Absolutely.
that
And
was
you
true
can
for your
and you can step backwards, and that's okay. I mentor people all the time. They relapse, then it happens.
journey?
It
Mm-hmm.
happens. What do we learn from we don't want to. Nobody wants to relapse, but what do we learn from it? What do we learn from the relapse? Take what you've learned and incorporate that into the next step forward.
Exactly. Can you maybe share briefly about how you dealt with relapses in your recovery journey?
Well, I haven't relapsed. I am very fortunate that since I accepted my desire chip in 12 step, April 8, 2007, I have not relapsed. But there were, as I stated before, knock on wood, one day at a time. But as I have stated before, there were hundreds or thousands of mini relapses where I had said to myself, I have to do something. This is the last time.
Mm-hmm.
And all I can say is that there is something out there for everyone that they can grab onto. It may not be clear to you now to motivate you to take that first step, to even, to risk relapse. Risk relapse. Take the
Right.
step and risk relapse.
Mm-hmm.
Recovery is risk. It is. But it's a risk. It is the best risk in the world. It is
Mm.
risk worth taking above anything all because it restores love. It
Mm.
restores trust. It restores family. It allows you to forgive yourself.
Exactly.
Someone's asking me if I relapse, do I restart the count to day one? You know what? I don't just judge anyone else's recovery. I
Mm.
think that's something everyone has to decide for themselves. It is not my place to determine what constitutes a relapse for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So I leave that to the person who asked the question to determine that, with hopefully the help of your treatment provider, your sponsor, people who are involved in your life, whether you have in fact relapsed.
Sure. And Brian, what are some resources that you have found helpful in your recovery? in your ongoing sobriety that have really just encouraged you and empowered you to
Well,
keep
I'll give a shout out to Addiction Hope and Eating Disorder Hope.
Thank
I read all the articles you put out. I'm always reading your content. I find them very
you so
informative.
much.
I have found that educating myself about what I'm going through has been one of the biggest tools of my recovery moving forward. Because the more you know about where you are, the more you can plot your course of recovery.
Absolutely. Thank you. We just got one more question from one of our viewers asking, how does someone handle shame?
I handle shame by speaking out.
Hmm.
Shame is the voice of silence. Because when I speak out about how I feel, I realize I'm not judged. Shame goes away. Shame, for me, I'm not going to judge anyone else's shame. I'm not going to delegitimize anyone else's concept of shame. For me, I felt that when I told my story, the shame went away. I feel no shame about where I've been. I feel no shame about where I am. I feel no shame about where I'm going. You know, I get called, I put myself out there on social media. I get called the worst things imaginable. Crackhead, this, that. You know, they're words. They're not who I am. If you're struggling, words are not who you are. Shame is what you create for yourself. Talk to someone. Shame is usually something you're hiding. You know, so talk to someone. Get it out of hiding. And I think you may find that you view shame in a different way.
Very insightful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Brian. Do you have any final thoughts of any words of encouragement that you want to offer to anyone who may be at various stages of recovery?
You're struggling. There's all kinds of hope out there. Reach out to me. My email is brian@briancuban.com. I'm not an addiction guru, but we all have resources. We all know places to send people. We all can make suggestions. We all can give support. Whether you understand addiction or not, we all have the one tool that God has given us to empower others to recover. That is the gift of empathy. So I will use that. I will give you the best advice I can. So just reach out to those who love you and allow them to empathize with you. Empathize with yourself.
Very powerful. Thank you, Brian. You have an amazing story of hope, and we just so appreciate your encouragement and just you taking the time to share that with us. Just in closing, can you also just share where we can find your book and just more information about you? I know that you're doing a lot of speaking right now.
Absolutely. I will announce that I just created a relationship with APB speakers.
Awesome. Congratulations.
I'm on the web by Googling APB Speakers Bureau. And if you're interested in having me speak, I do. I'm speaking quite a bit during the summer and fall. I speak at colleges. I speak at mental health events. I speak at nonprofits. So, or you can reach out to me personally, and I'll put you in touch with them, brian@briancuban.com. You can also go to my website, briancuban.com. I also write for psychcentral.com, so you can find me there. I'm everywhere. You can find me on Twitter at bcuban. So
wonderful.
I can be found everywhere and anywhere.
Thank you, Brian. We appreciate that. It's been so great to see, you know, your speeches and just that your recovery story is spreading, and it just is so hopeful for so many people. So keep sharing that message. We love it.
Thank you, Crystal. Have me back on anytime. I love it.
Thank you so much, Brian. And just in closing, we do have Brian Cuban's recovery story on Addiction Hope and also eatingdisorderhope.com if you're interested in checking it out. And please be sure to stay tuned for our future and upcoming Google Hangouts and Twitter chats.
Check out their site anyway. It's a wonderful site.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your time and just wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.